Joining us now, White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. And Karine, welcome back to the show. We want to ask you about voting rights and the efforts there in just a moment. But I think first I'd like to follow up on the question that the Reverend Al Sharpton asked the president himself yesterday, and that is, what is the White House position on the filibuster?
Thank you, Mika, for having me on today. It's good to see you all. As the president has been pretty clear on where he stands on filibuster, and, you know, the president has been was a senator for 36 years. He understands what works and he understands what doesn't work. And one of the things that he's talked about is going back to a period where the filibuster actually did work, where people had to stand their ground on the floor and really talk about their issue on the floor and do the talking filibuster, if you will. You know, from 1917 to 1971, the filibuster was done about 58 times. In the past year, you times that by 5. So it's not working in the way that it should be working. It's being used in a way that's obstructing. It's doing in a way that the American people didn't vote for. And so what we knew, it used to be a time where a senator would stand on the floor and talk and talk and talk and talk until they collapse. And what would happen then is the filibuster would break, and then you would get to a quorum and you would vote. And so that is what the president is wanting to go back to a time where the filibuster actually worked and things got done.
Okay, but Karine, you're talking about the value of the filibuster historically. I need to know, though, because you do realize that none of this happens unless the filibuster goes away.
No, I think what the president is saying is that he wants it to go back to a time where the filibuster actually worked, and that's the talking filibuster that I just laid out. Look, here's the thing as well, Mika. Right now in the Senate, they don't have the vote to reform the filibuster or to get rid of the filibuster, I should say. And so that's a major component of it as well. But what the president wants to do is he wants to continue to work in a bipartisan way, as we have seen with his Build Back Better plan, as we've seen with the bipartisan infrastructure framework. This is what he wants to do, and on the dual track process that we're seeing as well, with just in broadly with the Build Back Better agenda that we're seeing, and as we're doing the dual track framework here. But here's the thing: we have to come together. This is the time to do that. The American people, elected the president to make sure that we deliver, and this is what the president is working towards at the moment.
Karine, it's Casey Hunt. It's good to see you. I don't mean to harp on this, but if you do change it back to a talking filibuster, what's to keep Republicans from grinding all of the work of government to a complete halt? We know it seems that they would be willing to go down to the floor and spend as much time as necessary. They view this as an existential situation on voting rights, and there's still a lot of other basics of governing that you need to do. So just to underscore the question, how do you get this done if there is still a 60-vote threshold of any kind in the Senate?
Well, here's the thing. The president yesterday made it very clear where he was on the voting rights, right? He went to Philadelphia, a place where our democracy was created, and he was really clear on what he was seeing across the country with the attacks on our rights to vote, with what Republicans were doing across the country. And what he was saying as well is this is the biggest, kind of the biggest threat to our democracy since the Civil War, and how it is critically important to get legislation done. It's an imperative process for our nation. And so what he's going to continue to do, he's going to continue to have these conversations with Congress on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrats, which he has done, and try to get to a place where we can get both of this legislation for the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed. So we still have a period now where the John Lewis Act hasn't gone forth yet and hasn't been passed. So there's some hope there to get that done. But the president is going to continue to do that. We as an administration is going to continue to have those conversations and get that done, because that's what the American people deserve. They deserve to make sure that their vote is counted.
Karine, are you, as the president, open to the suggestion that Jim Clyburn made that there be a carve-out specifically for voting rights, constitutional rights from the filibuster? Is it possible President Biden could support carving out voting rights and ending the filibuster on that issue?
Well, as you know, Congressman Clyburn is a friend of the president, is a colleague, someone who has been a leader in the space of voting rights and civil rights. So he is incredibly respected by the president and all of us here. But again, Casey, when it comes to the filibuster, the votes aren't there yet. And so what the president is pushing for is a talking filibuster to go back to a time where the filibuster actually worked. And look, we're going to continue doing the work. We're going to continue talking to the American people as the president did. We're going to continue to make sure that it's clear of what is happening. This assault on our democracy is hurting the American people, is hurting our right to vote. And so that is what we're going to continue to do. That's what the president is going to continue to talk about. And that's what's the most important thing here.
White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, thank you very much for being on the show today.